It's the latest from Panasonic.
Excellent. It's so
Yeah.
tiny.
Yeah, you can't believe I used that to had an interview with Michael Bloomberg.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, we love Michael. He's great. Mayor Mike.
I never forget his speech here in Singapore. Well, what will happen is you just have to look at the camera for a few
Okay.
seconds. I will introduce you, and after that, I'll just turn to you and we begin our conversation.
Okay.
And so I will address you as Dr. Karen. Is that correct?
Yeah,
And-
Dr. Karen's good enough.
Yeah, and then I'll just mention a little bit who you are, and then we will go straight into the issue of human capital and social capital issues and connections, which is pretty good. Hi, welcome to the National Critics' Choice Online News. Hi, I'm Robin Stienberg, and welcome to my show again. For all our fans traveling around the world and staying at the Hyatt especially, today we have a very special guest, uniquely, from New York. And she's none other than Dr. Karen Stephenson, and she happens to be a corporate anthropologist and a leader in growing field of social network business consultants. And in 2001, her consulting firm, Netform, was recognized as one of the top 100 leading innovation companies by CIO. Now, Dr. Stephenson has earned praises for innovation, solving a variety of complex problems, which have been featured in The Economist, the Forbes, The Guardian, as well as the Financial Times, as well as the Wall Street Journal, Fast Company, and Wired. Dr. Karen, welcome to my show, and it's a very informal online social network platform that we have here called Say Hyatt, and many are curious to know more about your insights on human capital and social capital. Because a lot of corporations and individuals are trying to balance these two areas, and how can they overcome these obstacles like such as conflict of interest and so on.
Well, I think it's not a problem, but it's a polarity. I don't know if your readers and your viewers are familiar with the term polarity. Problems can be solved. Polarities are dynamic tensions which must be managed. So the social capital and the human capital is not a problem to be solved. It's a balance that must be managed. So I think that's the number one realization for most people, is that it's not a problem to be solved, it's a tension to be managed. Then, depending on if you're trying to do more innovation, you need to be focusing more on the social capital, because that is the way the social capital works, is through these networks. Once the innovation is created and realized, then you can siphon off the innovation and move it more into the processes and the procedures of human capital or the hierarchy. And those two then come together, but that's how you would manage it. There are many times when you don't need innovation and you need more efficiency, in which case the human capital needs to have a higher importance. So I think if we are measuring both of these, then we can manage the balance. But right now, we're not measuring social capital at all. We just have one thing that we're measuring. So that's one of the reasons why our organizations don't do very well at managing social capital, measuring it, and managing the innovation, because they're only measuring one part of the equation, not two.
Oh wow! And now, what's in it for the social capital? As well as the networks.
Well, research has shown that almost all innovation, in fact, I think it's almost 100%, comes from collegial relationships that people have with one another. They usually are from diverse groups of people that are brought together, but they trust one another. They trust one another. So if they're collegial and they trust one another, that's a network. That doesn't necessarily mean that somebody's going to be the boss, somebody's going to be over here. But it means that they're brought together in a network. How they became a network is anybody's guess. I mean, we all form networks in our community, our churches, our works, and things like that. But the point is that they're in that network, and it's that network that leads to the innovation. And the reason why the innovation comes out of that network is because people are comfortable enough, they trust one another, to voice and to talk about new ideas that maybe they would be too nervous to talk about in front of their boss. So these networks are really good incubators, if you will, for creating and voicing and surfacing new ideas. And then once the new ideas get tested, then you can move it over to the hierarchy.
Huh, interesting. So folks say you could forge friendships among colleagues or even among third parties to enhance innovations in your life.
Yeah.
And who knows, you could be the next Bill Gates. And Karen, what was your inspiration in trying to lead as a leader in social network business consultancy?
Consultancy.
Yes.
Well, this is interesting. I think this will be interesting for a number of your viewers and readers because my undergraduate degree is in quantum chemistry. And working my way through school, I was in charge of a laboratory where I was on the mezzanine floor surrounded by glass. And I was looking down on 200 chemists and physicists as they were interacting. So when they were interacting with each other and I was watching them, all of a sudden I saw these patterns of interaction that I'd seen in chemistry and in my physics classes. And I thought, whoa, it was an epiphany. It was a moment of realization where I went back to my professors. I was getting my master's degree in quantum chemistry. So I went back to my professors and I said, I've just seen something in the laboratory, and I never would have seen it had I been on the ground. I was on the mezzanine floor looking down, and so I saw these patterns and I thought, I've got to go check that out. So I transferred all of my studies over to the Department of Archaeology, where there at the time was the father of graph theory, Frank Harari, who's now dead, and a structuralist, he is an anthropologist, Per Haig, also now passed on. And I studied with the two of them and got my master's in mathematical modeling and looking at human groups. But it was no different than looking at the physics and the chemistry of large macromolecules, the way that people interact. So basically, I was applying another discipline of quantum chemistry and math onto human systems in the way that they formed. And that's actually what started me, and that happened when I was about 28 years old.
Well, it must be a revelation then. It is a spiritual journey. And also, what is the philosophy about the Doctors Without Borders? I mean, you mentioned that.
Well, Doctors Without Borders is an example of a network of people, of doctors that trust one another. They come together, they work together, they fly off to Haiti, they fly off to China, they fly off to where there's a natural disaster or a man-made disaster to help people. But each of these doctors lives in a community, lives in a hospital, has their own practice. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. They could be hired by a hospital. But the point is that they each belong someplace else. But as a network, they come together to collaborate and to cooperate to help others. And so that's a perfect example of how the network exists on top of the individual hierarchies that are on the ground in all these different countries where all the doctors are hired. So a lot of these networks are volunteer, so that's what the Doctors Without Borders is. It's a volunteer network. Well, it was in the early stages. And in the example that I used in the speech, I talked about how one person had gone from one country to another, but because that person was a critical connector in that network, the network actually fell apart, but nobody knew that person was a critical connector. He didn't know he was a critical connector because nobody was measuring the network. But if you measured the network, you would have realized that, and you would have encouraged that doctor maybe not to not go away. He can go away to this other country, but maybe what you would have done is that you would have encouraged him to bring in an intern, train somebody to take over for him, rather than just hand over his iPod,
And speaking about iPods and today's technology and revolving cultures, what advice would you give for anyone at your workplaces, in corporations, who are trying to relate to one another and yet not stepping into a conflict of interest? Do you have any three key points that you probably have seen in your research?
I think we should embrace the idea that there will always be a conflict of interest, and then first try to understand that. And then once we understand it, then we exchange. I think the thing is that we mustn't run from the conflict. We just have to recognize what it is and then be upfront about that. Because I think what happens is that people are so risk averse from a conflict of interest that instead of reaching across different disciplines or across different departments to collaborate with each other, they're going to stay within their own silo, within their own little tribe, and never step outside for fear that they might break some rule. And if people are afraid to break rules, then there'll never be any innovation. So I think in order to have innovation, we first have to just, instead of running from a conflict, let's embrace the idea that it will exist, understand how it could occur, and then allow people to come together. That's what I would do.
Huh. Well,
Run toward the problem. Don't run away from it.
so don't run away from the problem then. So embrace it. And
Embrace it.
And no, Karen, before we let you go, I mean, it's been a real pleasure to understand your insights of what is to come. But what do you see in the next 5 years, where the trend is going? Do you think the world is going to be in a better place by embracing some of your findings?
Well, I don't know that the world's going to embrace my findings in 5 years. I've been arguing for it for 35 years. So let's see if that actually happens. But I'll tell you one thing. One of the reasons why we have the toxic CEOs and the financial breakdown, and we've got the issue with the LIBOR and all that other kind of stuff, is because nobody was understanding and measuring those networks. They weren't transparent. If we start to measure it, we won't have some of these problems. This I can guarantee. That's why I'm arguing for social capital and why it should be measured across companies. It should be measured in institutions of higher learning. It should be measured in governing bodies like LIBOR and the central banks and things like that. If we just measured that in addition to everything else we measure, we would avoid a lot of these problems. We've gone back and done forensic analysis showing that had we measured it, we would have seen the problem before it actually happened. Just like in the case with the Doctors Without Borders. Had we been measuring those networks, we would have known that that guy was the key connector, and when he said, I want to retire and I want to leave the network, we would have said, great, we want to support you, but take 6 months and train this intern before you go. And we would have avoided that problem.
That sounds like romance. I mean, can you just answer this question and be very frank about this? About the case, the guys from New York and even here in Singapore, we found that many of the movers and shakers are able to move mountains because they were romantically in love, with what they do, and also with the people that they relate to every day, and they treat each other as though they're in love with each other. But actually, it's all about innovation. Is that possible?
Well, yes, I think. Once you unleash people's passion and their ability to innovate, it creates this kind of dynamic, actually it creates a dynamism in the human group, not just the person, but in the human group. There's a researcher, Csikszentmihalyi, who wrote about it. It's called flow. Once you're in flow, you don't even realize the passage of time because you're moving and working with other people and you're talking about new ideas, and it's almost as though time stands still. It's moving, time is moving, but you're not aware of it because you're involved in it. And they do that research, and if you've ever been so fortunate as to be in one of those instances, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's amazing. And that's actually where most of the innovation comes from, the drivers of innovation.
Has that happened to you before?
Yes, it has.
Yeah.
And it is special.
I think,
It's special.
I felt that way too. Well, thank you for joining me here at the National Critics' Choice. Say it hi, I'm Robin Stienberg, and joining me with Dr. Karen Stephenson. It's been a great week. Please look out for more news on our YouTube channel, Say it hi, the National Critics' Choice, or you can also visit me at Facebook, Robin Stienberg, or the National Critics' Choice, Say it hi. Once again, have a great week ahead.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Karen.